when I encounter other people like online who have just started and they're kind of overwhelmed by all the YouTube videos and all the possibilities and all the various directions, I feel fortunate that my um, desires or my goals were so simple because it was already, without even knowing it, I think I had built in um, like a way to prevent disappointment or to be discouraged. I really did. And it wasn't necessarily knowingly, but I think I did. So it
Yeah.
was that I had simple goals
Uh-huh.
and achieved many of them. And for me, those were just wins that were, just constant encouragement to move on to bigger, simple goals.
Welcome back. Today we have something new on the channel. My student Tony was kind enough to agree to sit down for an interview with me because I've noticed that I, as the teacher, always see the entire learning process. I get to peek behind the curtain. I see what everyone's progress looks like from week to week. I know what their pieces sound like when they're not finished. I know what the process looks like. And I know how far and how much they're working every week, kind of how everything is progressing. But as a student, you don't necessarily get to see that. So today is part one of a mini part interview with Tony Craine. Today we're going to hear sort of his origin story, how he got interested in piano, what his musical background is, how he started playing. He's been playing on his own for around 2 years now, and then what that process looks like, what role motivation plays, and so on. So I'll let you hear it in his words. And thank you again to Tony for his time and for agreeing to share with all of us what his process looks like.
Oh, hi. I'm I'm Tony Craine. I'm a beginning piano student, um, 2 years, but beginning, who now works with Robin. And piano is very important to me, and it's been a really wonderful addition to my life in ways that I didn't expect. Um, and I'm happy to be here to talk about my experience.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I think everyone's going to have a lot to learn from you. So thank you so much.
Let's hope so.
We'll do our best.
Yeah, we will.
Great. So, first things first, how did you decide you wanted to play piano? What drew you to the instrument? What did your kind of initiation process look like?
I come from a very from a I was raised in a home where music was very important, particularly to my mother. And we were all as kids. My parents did not meddle in our education at all. They were very hands off. But one thing that we knew, all of us, I have four siblings, was that we were going to take lessons to learn how to play an instrument. And if there was a chorus at school that we could be in, we had to be in it. That was a pretty well established from a young age. And we sang all the time, not all the time, but we sang quite a bit as a family. We'd go to my grandparents' house. I had a grandfather. Now this we're talking about like 1970. I'm 8 years old. My grandfather played electric guitar. He had an electric guitar. Now, today, if you're a grandfather who plays an electric guitar, that's probably maybe almost normal. My brother is a grandfather. He plays an electric guitar. But back then, it was like the Beatles played guitars. Grandfathers, didn't. So he was a self-taught musician. He played guitar. His parents were musicians. That he was from England, and they had a pub in Bristol where they were the entertainment. My
Hmm.
great grandparents they played banjo and probably piano. So that he came from that tradition. He was a self-taught musician. He played guitar, he played banjo, he played piano, all self-taught. Um, my mom learned to play piano and sang. Her brother was eventually became a professional singer. He was a fairly not well known, but he was a fairly successful um, singer in Chicago in the 40s and 50s, and then nationally, like in the 50s. And for people my age, and this will mean nothing to you, Robin, but for people my age, he sang on the Steve Allen Show. He sang on the Don McNeil Breakfast Club, which was a national radio show. So singing and music in my family were very important. Well, we had a piano in the house. Everybody was going to take piano lessons. That was the thing. My two sisters did, my two brothers did, but apparently sometime around age 9 or so, I said something about violin. I apparently expressed some opinion positive about the violin, and they jumped on that, which I appreciate. I've always appreciated that they were at least going to let me do what it is that they thought I wanted to do. So I took violin lessons. I did the Suzuki method for with like private lessons with a friend of the family for maybe a half a year or something. And then I took the violin to school and took lessons at school for maybe about a year, and it didn't stick. I didn't dislike it necessarily. I didn't like carrying a violin to school was probably the worst part. That was what dissuaded me. So that dropped off. So I had like a basic understanding of like music and rhythm and some stuff, notation or whatever. But everybody else in my family could play the piano. And my older sister and one of my brothers are became, pretty good at it. And I have a brother. My brother is a pretty prolific YouTube musician. He makes all of his own videos where he plays every part. He's got a video with like 5 of him or 4 of him. Um, but for me, I sang after that, but I never did play anything. And when I was like in my 20s, I had a good friend since childhood who played guitar and wanted to be a musician, and he would come over to my house and start playing the piano, and that bugged me that he could play my piano and I couldn't. And since he is a professional musician, he's gone on to become a fairly successful professional musician. But at the time, for him to sit down and start playing like chords and making, you know, melodies happen, he didn't have any training, but he just knew enough about music that he could do it. And that always kind of irked me in what turned out to be a positive way. And so when I was in like probably I don't know my 30s or something, I decided, okay, now I'm gonna get the piano lessons that I never took.
Mhm.
And I bought a keyboard. It wasn't like a piano. It was just a keyboard, and I didn't understand the difference really, which is kind of remarkable given that I had a piano in my house my whole life. But I didn't. I just thought, oh, it has keys, it makes
Uh-huh.
noise, and bought a couple Alfred books and started trying to learn and realized I should probably get a teacher. So I started taking lessons at the Old Town School of Folk Music in Chicago, which is a pretty well established place and kind of famous. And that lasted for a few months. And that also kind of petered out, and it was because I didn't know what I wanted
Mhm.
out of playing the piano. I just knew I wanted to play the piano. So that kind of came and went, and I gave my keyboard to my brother. You can see my keyboard in some of his music videos. Um, but I kept all the books. I bought, anytime I get interested in anything, I buy a pile of books. And so I kept all of the books from my piano phase then. And about 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I saw an article in the New York Times about how there were fairly inexpensive but good digital pianos that you could get for like $500-600. And I had no idea. I thought a digital piano would be thousands of dollars. I thought it was something I could never afford. And found out that, well, you can get started like a starter piano for $500 or $600. So I got one,
Mhm.
and had known for a while that I wanted to play, and only knew that I wanted to give it a more intentional attempt. I didn't want to buy it until I had some idea of what I wanted to get out of it, but I also knew that maybe basically it was just committing to it for 6 months or a year just to see if I could if it would even be worth my while, not a waste of money or time. And turns out it was absolutely worth my while. So that's how I got to where I was when I started playing piano 2 years ago. It was I knew I had the right instrument, which was important, and I hadn't understood that in the past. And thanks to, people like you on YouTube, before I spent a dime on a piano, I could spend a lot of time finding out, well, what does it really take, and what do I really need to know about music theory or about reading music, or how long does it take to learn all that kind of stuff. So I was pretty well prepared. I spent a lot of time watching piano videos and getting a sense of, well, could I even, is this worth my while? And I decided it was. And so I got the piano and um, got some books and signed up for a bunch of various online ways of learning.
Mhm.
And that's how I got started.
Great. And what were your main goals when you first started? So you knew that you wanted to commit a certain amount of time, and then did you have something specific that you were working towards, or it was, I want to get through this year and not quit by the end?
That was, uh, I mean, it was more than that,
Mhm.
but I had such a keen understanding of how it had petered out before
Mhm.
that my goal was to first learn about what it was that I thought I would need to know or be able to do, and and then try to do it. And one of the things that appealed to me in a way that I think is probably unusual was I would watch videos of people like playing scales or playing very simple, like Hanon exercises, and think I'd like to be able to do that. It sounds kind of like music, and there's precision involved, which I know takes. I understood that um, there's a learning process and a process of practicing, um, and maybe starting slowly or whatever. I don't know that I knew what that specifically, but I understood that those were things that I could not do now if I sat down in front of a keyboard. But if I applied myself in a fairly, probably short period of time, I would be able to make those sounds come out of my own piano. And it's very simple, maybe even naive, but that really did thrill me, to hear like the first Hanon and think I could make that happen. I'll pay $500 for that. It really did appeal to me
Uh-huh.
on that simple level. Of course, I wanted to play music, and there were plenty of songs I could have named then. That's, wow, it'd be nice if I could play that. Um, but is because I knew I was not going to be able to play. There's what John Field. I've had a couple of collections of John Field nocturnes and sonatas for 30 years. It is one of my two of my favorite recordings. And it's like I'd like to be able to try to play these someday, but I didn't have any, illusions that I'd be playing those in the first 5 years or whatever of playing piano. So I certainly had musical goals, but fortunately for me, I had a much simpler path to contentment.
Okay.
So those were the early goals. Really were just, how do you make this thing make sounds that aren't just completely arbitrary and horrible? And turns out I was able to do that.
Uh-huh.
It's uh when I encounter other people like online who have just started, and they're kind of overwhelmed by all the YouTube videos and all the possibilities and all the various directions, I feel fortunate that my um, desires, or my goals, were so simple, because it was already, without even knowing it, I think I had built in um, like a way to prevent disappointment or to be discouraged. I really did. And it wasn't necessarily knowingly, but I think I did, because a I have a I like playing scales, and I know that's like the thing every piano teacher says is, well, I know you don't like to play scales. And I'm like, well, actually, I could sit there for a long time and play scales. I really could.
Uh-huh.
So it
Yeah.
was that I had simple goals,
Uh-huh.
and achieved many of them. And for me, those were just wins that were, just constant encouragement to move on to
Uh-huh.
bigger, simple goals.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's so important to have those early wins because if you just feel like, "Ugh, I haven't accomplished anything,"
Yeah.
that's when
And if
that process becomes very frustrating.
Yeah, and if everything's hard, if everything just seems undoable, it's why would you keep doing it? It takes, even if you're not trying, it still takes quite a bit of time
Hmm.
to sit there and, not do it, quite frankly. So it's good to have those very simple but very clearly defined wins to keep you moving forward and to keep you interested and motivated.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Then what's one accomplishment that you achieved over the last year that you're really proud of?
It's playing the Bach prelude in C.
Uh-huh.
Um, that I was talking to my brother a few weeks ago about playing piano and telling him I'd sent him the video of me playing it, and he asked me how I learned it. And I said, well, fortunately, I encountered a teacher who was able to trick me into thinking that I could play it. And that was you, that was Robin. We sat on a Zoom call, and I printed out the music and put it in front of me, and we just started at the first note,
Uh-huh.
and we went through the first four measures very slowly, very deliberately. um, but I recognized it. I didn't know what it was when I looked at it.
Mhm.
But as soon as I'd hit three or four notes, I recognized what it was. I knew the piece, and I thought, am I really going to be able to play this? I was from the get-go, I was so excited. And it was a lot of, it took a lot of time, it was a lot of work. I still can't play it perfectly, but I can play it all the way through,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
capably, and I do it quite a bit.
Mhm.
And I'm so proud of that. Um, it really is. It's beyond what I imagined I would be doing by this time
Mhm.
as a player, and that's been fabulous. So thank you.
Thank you. It's all the time that you put in. It's been cool to see how much you've progressed and how much you've learned through that piece and just grown as a pianist. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember saying to you, we were maybe two measures in, and I said, "Look at me, Robin! I'm playing Bach." I
I know,
couldn't
I
believe it.
remember.
Bach. That's fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah. 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 And that wasn't even a whole year ago yet. I think that was in April
that
or
was in the spring, like April or yeah, something like that. So yeah, and I think by the end of the summer,
hmm.
I had the whole thing learned, and that was with some detours. I had a busy summer, so I wasn't always able to. I was practicing the parts I had learned, but I wasn't pushing forward through the piece as quickly as I would have liked to. So it took longer than it could have, but even as long as it took, I was still surprised that I didn't think last March that, by September, I'd be playing anything in full with the name Bach stamped at the top of it.
Yeah. 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 You put in a lot of amazing work. That's great.
Thank you.
Um, and how do you feel that your approach to learning piano has evolved over time? So you had really clear things that you were working towards at the beginning and you had simple tasks that you kind of sought out for yourself, but how have has your approach to playing evolved over the last couple of years?
Well, I would say, like, in two sort of, in broad terms, two ways. The first being um, that I had a shift in mindset, I guess, in that when I started, I thought I had made an honest assessment of whether it was possible for me to work with a teacher.
Mhm.
And, between, like, well, how much is it going to cost? And do I have that much time in my schedule? And can I even find someone that I'll, mesh with? I had myself convinced that that was not going to be feasible.
Mhm.
So for the first 15 months or so, or maybe a little less, but first year, we'll say, I was convinced that I had to teach myself, and that that I could do that capably. I knew it wasn't going to be as good as working with a teacher, but I felt like I had experienced enough through YouTube and saw enough people saying, "Here's how you teach yourself," that is like, well, I think I can do this. And that changed about a year ago. It was right around the beginning of the year where I realized this. I like what I'm doing. I never lost any motivation. I spent a ton of time just sitting at the piano pretty much every day, but knew that I wasn't progressing the way I could be, and also knew that I had no idea how to not just self-assess. I mean, you can tell if you're missing notes, or there are ways that you can tell that you're not succeeding or not, or whatever. But I also understood how much I didn't know. The more you know, the more you learn, the less you know. And absolutely, as I began to learn and began to understand that there were, new sort of hurdles I was going to have to try to find for myself, I had no idea what those hurdles were. I didn't know, what piece should I work on next. And you can go on YouTube and hear, 100 different opinions, and you don't know who to believe. And when you do believe someone and you pick something, uh, you don't know what you're getting yourself in for. So, and actually, I've got my other main piece that I've shared with you. I think it was in a live stream. I think it was the last one you did. Um, is that Christmas Time is Here from Charlie Brown? That is the version that I learned off a tutorial on YouTube, was billed as a beginner version. Um, and it took me a long time to learn. It took me 9 months or something before I could even play the thing all the way through. And I knew it was difficult from the start, but I thought, okay, they said it's a beginner. Oh, it's a beginner. Well, I spent a lot of my first year practicing that, learning it, trying to get it right. And then the first time I ever showed you a version of me playing it, you're like, that's not a beginner piece. I was like, well, geez, so you don't even know, even if you trust people to say, this is, as a beginner, you need to play these 5 pieces. Maybe for some beginners, maybe for many beginners, but not every beginner. So I knew that I needed someone to be able to say, okay, I see where you are. I see how you work on this. Here are my suggestions for what a person, with the work, whatever you've done, whatever what you're weak at, strong at. Here's where maybe you should point your efforts. And that was a that was an important decision, and then finding a teacher was not easy. I did take some lessons um, uh, locally uh, where I live for a few months at the beginning of the year, but I had a great teacher. She was very nice, but it was just her approach was just not going to work for me, and the time, like the time commitment was odd for me. So for a number of reasons that had nothing to do with how good the teacher was or how helpful she was. It just didn't work out for me. It wasn't what I wanted, and then I found you like about the same time, and thought, well, maybe I can go the online route, because I really wasn't sure that that would work. And it did. So, okay, so that's number one. Sorry, I'm a little verbose. That's the main area is my approach became, get a teacher, don't trust yourself. Or don't trust yourself to be a teacher. I'm not a piano teacher.
Sure.
And the other main area was understanding. It's something that you've helped me come to understand, but it wasn't a difficult thing to accept, which is you can't just work on technique. And I didn't, I wasn't necessarily a person who thought, oh my gosh, I have to get my technique down. I have to be really good at all this technique stuff before I can play pieces. It wasn't that, you know, specific in my mind. I just enjoyed it. I
Mhm.
enjoyed it, and I knew that it was good for me in the long run to enjoy the things that most people maybe don't even want to do, playing scales and technique exercises. Um, but I had underestimated the importance of just having a piece in front of you that is a challenge, that you have to read, and that you have to figure out the rhythms, and and memorize or whatever. That had not really, I hadn't understood it as well as I should. And it was, working with you, um, that pretty quickly I learned you can make there's so much that there's so many ways that you can progress, failing and eventually succeeding on a piece,
Mhm.
um, that you just can't get out of technique exercises, regardless of how good or bad your technique is. That there are all kinds of things, um, in even like, I'll say it, but I can't give you an example. Like even technique, or not technique, theory.
Mhm.
You start to, even I have some theory workbooks, and I understand it, on a piece of paper in a workbook, but it's another thing to kind of see it in motion and have to be and have to engage with it in motion with music theory to really understand, how profoundly important it is to being a better player. That to understand that's what a C chord looks like, even though it's broken up and it's across an entire measure, and there's a couple other notes in there. You can still, there are, and much more advanced, concepts than that. But those were the two things: was realizing not only should I work with a teacher, but I can. There are ways to make it work, and the other was, um, learn learn actual pieces that you will grow from playing pieces in a way that you just can't if you don't, or if you don't play, if everything you play is easy.
Mhm. Mhm.
And actually I learned that. I didn't know I was learning it, but that, the 9 or 10 months I spent learning that, Charlie Brown, the Christmas Time Is Here, um, I didn't know I was learning things, but I was, it was certainly pushing me in directions that technique exercises were never
Mhm.
gonna push me. But it was a long it was a long lesson that, had I had a little more guidance, maybe those lessons could have been, quicker, with different pieces, or different, just some different guidance.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I always appreciate that you do such a good job of crystallizing information. Like I feel like you take things that I say and you just convey it in a way that's so much more approachable for everyone to understand, I think. It's like, yeah, he can talk for me. This
I can certainly talk. Um, I make my living as a writer, so that's probably part of it. I do I I'm particularly, that's one of my strengths, is being able to, in writing, or I like to think it is, people tell me it is taking complex concepts and making them understandable to
Mhm.
a reader who maybe, wouldn't understand them, and maybe wouldn't know how to begin to try to understand them.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
I
It's
appreciate the
always
compliment.
nice to talk to you. Sometimes the way you say things is like, yeah, that's what I've been trying to say for the last 5 years, and now I've got it.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Steal all you want from me, Robin.
Good artists borrow, great artists
That's
steal,
right.
right?
That's right.